Despite more than a decade of widespread attention on happiness and the benefits of positive psychology, there is an epidemic of unhappiness in children and teens. Quite severe unhappiness. Health statistics over the past decade show that beyond the 20 to 25% of teens with major depression, there are another 40 who struggle with intrusive levels of depression, and sometimes often with anxiety and substance abuse as well. That's 65%. Kids of middle class and more affluent families, kids who would seem to have everything going for them, have far higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and antisocial tendencies than their less privileged peers. Why has the Mass Happiness Initiative failed our kids? Science is bringing the problem into resolution. The antidote would be in a new study just published online in the Journal of Religion and Health at Columbia University. It shows that happiness and the character traits of grit and persistence go hand in hand with a deeper inner asset, spirituality. The study measured as a deep spiritual connection with a sense of a sacred world. This research, 20 years old now, on adolescence, depression, and spirituality, shows more specifically how putting a priority on performance stunts development of a child's inner life. And the single most powerful protection against depression and suffering is the spiritual self. What we have learned is that children are born with an innate capacity for spirituality, just as they are born with the capacity to learn a language, read, and think. But just as it takes time and effort to develop the ability to speak or read, it also takes time and effort to develop our innate sense of the spiritual. A strong new body of science developed during the last decade to what we now consider to be a level of certainty demonstrates first that any sort of spirituality, be it Judaism, Islam, yoga, nature, any sort, becomes a source of health and thriving for kids. And second, that the lack of spirituality in families and youth culture can be a big source of suffering. Among other things, the research demonstrates spirituality plays a significant role in child social, emotional, and cognitive development. Kids with a strong social spirituality overall have greater grit, higher grades, more optimism, and persistent than kids without a strong sense of spirituality. Teenagers who say they have a strong sense of spirituality are 80% less likely than the norm to have unprotected or dangerous sex and 40% less likely to use drugs. Personal spirituality that includes a direct personal relationship with nature, a universal presence, or higher power by any name has a clear correlation with physical wellness and recovery from depression and disease. Indeed, greater spiritual awareness produces the same readings in brain scans as recovery due to medication. We have found that the natural spirituality of children and young people can be encouraged and fostered by such steps as meditation, prayer, or long walks in nature, where a sense of the transcendent can be engaged. Parents can demonstrate approval for and model such traits as caring for others, empathy, or optimism. Most important, even if it makes them feel uncomfortable, parents must not turn away from questions that children are prone to ask. Those difficult why questions that go directly to moral issues, or such visceral questions as whether there is a God, how we know, and what does that mean to us. In contrast to the performance self, the spiritual self is sturdy and resilient, happy at a win, but not dependent on it to feel worthy as a human being. In our excessively competitive culture, With often thin support for spiritual development, parents must actively work to help their children to have a spiritual life. Parents who aggressively push their children to achieve success in finding the right school, achieving the right kind of job, should consider the science in this matter. Spirituality is more essential to thriving and success than the ability to perform. Spiritual children have a sense of inner worth, a sense of the lasting, higher sacred self, much bigger than the day's win or a defeat. And when they achieve their goals, that better job or a higher income, the studies show that well-grounded, spiritually engaged young people can actually feel fulfilled by their life choices. When Lisa Miller first began her work 15 years ago, there was little scientific information linking spirituality and health. Amid this scarcity of data and a culture of enormous skepticism, Dr. Miller braved the rejections, offended individuals walking out on her talks, and slammed doors during her grand round medical presentations. She endured this in order to pursue an intuition that science had something fascinating to discover about spirituality's role in health. Indeed, with the combined efforts of Dr. Miller and a few other maverick scholars throughout the country, spirituality and health is now a thriving field of academic inquiry. Contributors from psychology, sociology, genetics, and neuroscience have established the central theme of Lisa Miller's latest book, The Spiritual Child. Human development naturally includes a transcendent component, and when this natural spiritual capacity is fostered in children, it is the most robust factor currently known to science to stimulate flourishing and prevent mental illness. While this fact is increasingly gaining recognition in academia, there has been little effort to translate the research into the mainstream. Dr. Miller's book represents a culmination of nearly 2 decades of findings on spirituality, now presented in this accessible format for the public. Parents wondering how to sow the beneficial seeds of spirituality in children will find this book particularly compelling. Miller argues that spirituality is a biologically endowed capacity, universal to human beings, one that, if attended to, will encourage flourishing. Miller next highlights the vital role that family and other integral figures play in fostering a child's spiritual development. Among families at high risk for depression, a spiritually oriented mother or child alone only marginally protects them. However, when both the parent and the child shared the same sense of spirituality, there was an 80% reduction in risk of depression. Miller takes this astonishing discovery and expands its chief implication throughout the first part of her book, laying the groundwork for your child's spirituality. This is vital for his or her lifelong well-being.